Hey everybody, it's Dave the Clone Maresca coming back with another installment of the Hollow 9 Network's 15 minutes of movie memory madness. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you like what you're hearing so far on the series. If you are, you know this is the part where I gratuitously ask you to like, subscribe, share, hit that button that says subscribe and smash the bell icon. Is it even still there? I don't, this is all, recycled rhetoric. But anyway, do the stuff. Do all the things for the platform. It helps us. It helps us help you. It helps you help us. It's all good. It's kind of like finding ancient DNA encased in amber and deciding, hey, let's bring dinosaurs back to life. Welcome to Jurassic Park. I hope you got a cup of damn fine coffee or maybe a cup of water from the water cooler. Like, hold on a second. Did you feel that, man? Was it just me or were those ripples in the water cooler? Oh, it's from the bubbles that come up from when you take the water at the water cooler. In any case, we are going all the way back to the glorious summer of 1993 when we first were treated to a trip to the fantasy land that was the original Jurassic Park. This movie, man, where to even begin? Because this movie just feels like, as much as any of the other movies from the 90s, and we haven't really gone earlier than the 90s except for Manhunter, which was in the 80s, but they just feel, at this point, this is where I realize how old I am talking about these movies on this show, because they're just like so ingrained in the zeitgeist that I've lived with during the decades here, that it's almost hard to remember a time before Jurassic Park. But I vividly remember that era. In fact, on the days that, life is a little too heavy, things are a little too much, and I have to try to meditate and relax my mind and kind of go to a happy place, the sort of sensation of the world, the sort of hope of the world, the sort of newness of things that we now take for granted, the lack of internet, the lack of cell phones, that was a time. And for some reason, the summer when Jurassic Park came out really stands out as one of these landmarks for me in memory of happiness, because I was in 7th grade, so we're going back, and it was one of the first instances where a concept kind of came out of nowhere and just spread across the world like wildfire. I mean, probably these days I would look at something like that and say, oh, somebody did an Illuminati ritual or something like that, because it went from a few people kind of had heard of the book, a few people had read the book written by Michael Crichton, the late great Michael Crichton, and started saying, hey, I think there's supposed to be a movie of this coming out, and I think Steven Spielberg is directing it. And the next thing you knew, everybody was reading the book, including me. At the time, I had a friend in school who was sort of a semi-professional child actor. He did a few commercials, and he was the one that would keep everybody in the school up on what was coming out, because he had the inside dirt. And I remember he was such a huge proponent of oh my god, you gotta read the book, we gotta read the book before the movie comes out. And so it was probably the first time that I was trying to race the clock. I've never been a very fast reader, so this was something that for me was kind of oh my god, I'm gonna try. And I didn't do it. I got about maybe halfway through the book before the movie came out, enough to be able to kind of see some differences, like the fact that they reversed the kids' roles pretty hardcore. In the book, their characteristics were just completely swapped. In the book, it was the boy who was kind of not really into everything, and the girl was kind of the nerd. And then you kind of get to the movie, and you're like, oh, why did they do that? I mean, it doesn't really matter. And you kind of, it's one of those things where I think because because we had seen some posters and the trailers had started coming out. In fact, the copy of the book that I was reading, the front cover, it was a paperback, but the front cover was the sort of general poster for the film, the sort of red circle with the black silhouette of the Tyrannosaurus Rex skeleton with a yellow border, and then the word Jurassic Park in the sort of white with a red inline. And I think it said like a story 65 billion years in the making. So I was reading the book that was officially released in the big push for the release of the movie. And so at that point, you can't help but picture the characters based on the people that that are playing in the movie. It's very rare. Like, in fact, I can't even think of many books these days that became movies where I didn't read the book until after the movie. And a lot of times it was always like, well, why are you reading the book after the movie? You already know what's going to happen. Well, no, in the books there's always cooler shit, and there's always slightly different things going on with the ending. So in a way, it's kind of like having two versions of the same story. And I always found that the movie was kind of like the Cliff's Notes version, whereas the book, books were incredible because you could go off on these chapters that didn't necessarily have to pay off by the end of the film. You could have these kind of little moments where, oh, that happened. Oh, we learned that about this character. In fact, there's stuff in the book that wound up becoming more of like the opening scene of the second movie, and in fact, the book opens where the worker that we see in the opening of the actual film, when they're delivering the crate with the raptor in it, and somehow in this massive gate that they built that has like a futuristic locking system, so very regimented process, where Muldoon is down there going, okay, move in, and gatekeeper, engage the locks, gatekeeper, open the gate, or moving crew, step away, gatekeeper, engage the locks, open the gate. And then somehow the ultra smart raptor inside the cage knows exactly when to jump and kick the wall so that the cage comes out of its locking mechanism, and now there's enough of a gap so that when the gatekeeper falls off, it could grab his leg. And now, okay, let's already start talking about this. Drink your coffee now. There's a dinosaur with the guy's foot in its mouth, I guess, and it's pulling him in. There's a bunch of people that have his torso and arms, and they're holding him out, and they're doing tug of war with this guy. And meanwhile, the rest of the crew is trying to stick tasers in between the cage bars, which are really slats. It's sort of like a solid cage with slats instead of bars, trying to electrocute this thing to get it to let go. And then eventually we get the iconic lines, "Shoot her!" Muldoon telling everybody, "Shoot her!" He's kind of like this Australian outback big game hunter who's been hired as sort of game warden of what we will eventually see as the theme park of Jurassic Park. Now in the book, you don't see any of that. In the book, the scene starts in a sort of medical infirmary on the island, and they bring in a worker who has a gash from his shoulder down to his hip. Basically the dude practically got ripped in half. And I think at this point, it's kind of this air of mystery where the doctors don't 100% know what the theme park is. It tap dances around revealing dinosaurs for as long as it possibly can, which I've always thought is funny, because even with the way they promote movies, there's no way to kind of really keep enough of an air of mystery that some of these clearly designed story elements would not already be kind of spoiled by the fact that we had to show some stuff in the trailer, and we had to do we had to do a lot of stuff to we had to do a lot of stuff that kind of let you know what you'd be kind of in for with this movie. So very rare. I've mentioned before, there are a few times where I've gone into a movie having zero understanding, having seen zero promos, maybe only saw a poster. the biggest one for me was Lord of the Rings. You know, I hadn't read the book. I had seen the cartoon of The Hobbit when I was a child so long ago that I didn't remember it at all, and I went into Lord of the Rings completely fresh, no idea what to expect. Jurassic Park had such an air of hype around it that it was sort of like one of these things where these days, modern days, and it's funny because they're making so many of these movies now, and they're making them in such a way that there's like a generation that doesn't even realize the story started with the one I'm talking about right now. I feel like Gen Z and the millennials are the premier masters of this whole not paying any sort of acknowledgement to the time before they were on the earth. And so for them, their Jurassic Park story begins at Jurassic World and moves into Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom and Jurassic World Dominion, which is sort of like for those of us who were there at the beginning, who already went through a trilogy that got progressively worse. You know, we went from Jurassic Park to The Lost World, which at least had a sequel novel to it. You know what I mean? And then there was Jurassic Park 3, which was just like, oh, why? Why did you do this to us? What happened? You know, we had done so much speculating and everybody was reading the book, so we kind of had a general sense of what was going on. I remember it was the first time, too, that there were people using the fact that they had finished the book or read the book before all the hype started as kind of like bragging rights, and it kind of felt like, oh, okay, thanks. You know, I specifically remember I was sitting after the movie had come out, because I think I was at day camp, maybe. I definitely wasn't working at a day camp yet. And I was sitting, the day camp I went to in my town was run out of the middle school. So where I'd gone to school all year, here I was hanging out again in the summertime. And I remember I was sitting inside after lunch reading the book, and someone walked by like, oh, I've already read that whole novel. And I'm like, okay, what, do you want a medal for that? Or I don't know what to tell you, buddy, but cool. And it was an interesting time, too, because it was a time before people would put two and two together on sort of movies possibly being connected to, like, you know, greater conspiracy theories. Because I remember within a year of the movie coming out, there were news stories of how, oh my God, you know, we've actually discovered amber that may have some ancient insects in it that we may, you know, this could be plausible. Maybe we could make a real Jurassic Park. So, you know, in the modern view, conspiracy theory mind says, okay, this has already happened. What we're watching is sort of a recap of something that really went down on an island somewhere, and they used this to kind of predictive program it into the psyche of the public at large and the zeitgeist, so that if by some, you know, oh my God, it's like the world doesn't want me to talk, I'm being attacked. If by some craziness, like dinosaurs started appearing off the shores of major, you know, population areas, we'd be like, oh, Jurassic Park must have lost a few animals. But yeah, so it was cool. It was a time of movie magic still, you know, the 90s. We were only a couple years out from the 1989 Batman. And also within that window was Dick Tracy the same year as this? I feel like this was the summer where we went to movies all the time. When I was growing up, this was a couple years before my parents got separated. In fact, probably actually, if this was 93, it was the last year before my parents got separated. And so I know that we were doing so much still, like, as a family, and this going to see this in the movies was like a big deal, you know. And there was a swim club we used to go to, and everybody at the pool was reading the book, and we were like talking about, oh my God, the movie opens next week, we gotta go see it. And there was this really awesome, at the time it was only a couple years old, brand new movie theater. It was a Lowe's in Ridgefield Park, New Jersey, that was almost like a movie palace in a way. It had so many screens, and it was such a big, you'd walk in and like the sort of atmosphere was huge. There were arcades on either side of the foyer area, and it was just like these huge gold columns that like went from the floor to the ceiling. In fact, I think they had even those virtual reality booths set up, like in the early days, where it was like the helmet and the joystick, and you didn't walk, but you would like be in this thing playing, I guess laser tag or something. Hard to describe. And it was polygon graphics too, but it was the fact that you were in a world and you're looking around with the helmet on, and I think a giant pterodactyl flies over. Yeah, a little bit of a sidetrack there. Anyway, that was the theater we went to. The theaters were all huge, stadium seating, and like would sell out for movies like this. Like I remember when Dick Tracy, we were like crunched together. There wasn't even a seat buffer between our group of 5 and like whoever was sitting next to us, and it was the same with Jurassic Park. And if this was like 93, I was in 7th grade, my middle sister was in 5th grade, and my youngest sister was in 3rd grade. I think she was actually pretty terrified by the T-Rex. The sound design in this movie really was next level at the time, and the theater had what was called the Sony Dynamic Digital Sound Surround System, so SDDS. And it was like, when the famous boom, the stomping of the T-Rex to let people know trouble was on the way happened, like the theater shook. And at one point, my youngest sister wound up having to like sit in my mom's lap because it was so intense. And it was an intense movie. Like it starts off all kind of fanciful and fanfare, and you've got Dr. Alan Grant played by Sam Neill, and Ellie Sattler played by Laura Dern, and they're kind of digging up they're at a dig site in Montana, and they're brushing dust off, they're brushing the dirt off of a skeleton that they found, and the helicopter arrives and they're freaking out because it's throwing dirt back onto the skeleton. And then you go in and you have this kindly little old man already in their trailer opening their champagne because he's gonna offer them the job of a lifetime, and we all know what it is, but the movie ends there kind of. He's like being very cagey and secretive about what it is. And he offers to fund their project for like another 3 or 4 years. And back in the day before the economy was on all of our minds, it was always these kind of like fringe scientists who were like geniuses in their field, but they didn't sell out to the corporate world. So they're always like, oh, how are we going to get funding? How are we going to get grant money? What's going to happen? I would point to another cool movie from the late 90s called The Relic, where, why can't I think of her name? It'll come to me later. But the main character in that movie was all, a lot of the motivation of how what she was trying to do was because like she had to compete with this other scientist for the grant money to keep her projects going in the museum in Chicago that she was working in. So we've got that, and then the super cool, I think Jeff Goldblum had already had a following at this point. The Fly had already sort of put him on the map, and lest we all forget his turn as one of the initial attackers in the original Death Wish, which didn't really see. I didn't see that until I went to college, and at that point you're kind of like, wait a minute, Ian Malcolm is breaking into this woman's apartment and raping her and her daughter? That's crazy. But yes, he's this kind of too cool for school mathematician, wearing all black. He's going very Johnny Cash, and the cool sunglasses. He even has kind of mannerisms and laughter like a dinosaur at one point, like in the helicopter on the way to the island. And then we have everybody's favorite character from Seinfeld, Newman, Wayne Knight, appearing as Dennis Nedry. Now, like, when I read the book, I did not picture Dennis Nedry from the description in the book as Wayne Knight, but once the sort of promotional stuff started coming out and you realize, oh, that's Dennis Nedry. And now when I say promotional materials, let's take an aside here. Let's go back to the 90s before everything was just straight up, oh, there's a thing online, or there's a video on YouTube, or there's a series of videos, there's a series of web pieces that are extra spots for the movie. It was all commercials on TV, commercials in the beginning, trailers at the beginning of other movies that you're seeing in the theater, and then toys. Like, and I'm just going to use toys as the blanket term because it was like everything you could think of. Stuffed animals, action figures, but the big thing in the 80s and 90s, and it kind of died off in the 90s, but anybody who was in the sort of world of comic books and card collecting, especially sports cards, there were card sets for movies. So, and not only like, you know, trading cards with the characters on them and different dinosaurs and different scenes from the movies, but then there were also playing cards. We had a deck of playing cards, like instead of regular bicycle 52 cards to play, you know, poker and stuff with, we had a deck of Jurassic Park cards, and it was still all the same suits. Like under the number you'd see like the spades, clubs, diamonds, or hearts, but the pictures on the cards were all the dinosaurs from the movies. It was like nuts. It was like everything. It felt like it was the summer of Jurassic Park. It was the year of Jurassic Park. It was like a month's, and it's kind of like a bygone thing. We don't really have, maybe the Marvel movies is the closest thing you have to having this kind of, it's like an atmosphere, but it wasn't the way, it didn't feel as natural and organic. It doesn't feel that way now as it did back then, where it was just kind of like, it's interesting, like, there's a video game called Jurassic World Evolution on PlayStation 4, which is basically like a SimCity style game, except that you're building Jurassic Parks. And I'm sort of probably in the crowd of folks who grew up with SimCity and SimCity 2000, and we might be a little bit over the city builder simulator games. They always seem cool at first, and then they just get boring. Even City Skylines 4, which I've got on PlayStation 4 and was like a freebie on my PS Plus account, it was cool at first, and then you kind of get bored, and then if you play it long enough, it just becomes a little bit of like a headache game. Then you go on YouTube and you see all these people who designed these crazy elaborate cities, and that reinvigorates your interest. Well, there were several video games from Jurassic Park, and this is both before the new gen consoles. Like, you had a Sega Genesis game, I think 2 Sega Genesis games actually, and in the Sega Genesis game you could actually play as the Velociraptor, which was pretty cool. You could play as either Grant or the Raptor, and if you're the Raptor, you have to kill the people. It was kind of nice how they flipped that on you. But then even the Super Nintendo game was awesome, except for the fact that I feel like that might be one of these games that they actually never finished the game and they released it like incomplete, because I played through it, and again, we're talking about the days before game consoles let you save games. Like in the early era of Nintendo, there were games like Metroid, which would give you like a code between levels as you're playing through the game, so that if you had to stop, because they knew the game was huge, if you had to stop, you could put in that code and it would like let you pick up from where you left off, and exactly with all the same weapons and everything. So that was really forward thinking on Nintendo, 8-bit original NES Nintendo's part. But Super Nintendo did not carry through with that particular feature. And so this Jurassic Park game, you had to go into it knowing that you were dedicating like a full day. And I had a buddy who's no longer with us, but my buddy Thad Novak, may he rest in peace. He was the son of Ralph Novak, the reviewer for People magazine, and so he would get all the consoles and games like early. And he every year for his birthday party, he would have a bunch of us over, and there would be different rooms with different consoles set up, and we started playing. One year, a couple of us started playing the Jurassic Park game, and we would like take turns and trade off the controller, because it was just this huge, long, kind of fetch questy kind of thing that it was cool. I mean, it was a lot of fun, but it got to a point where like, okay, you're Alan Grant, you're the Sam Neill character, and you're cruising around the island and you're picking up stuff, and the whole idea is to get nerve gas to use on the nest of raptors to clear it out, and then that was kind of how you won. And we all got up to the part where, okay, we've got the nerve gas and we find the nest, and there's no obvious or apparent way of how to use it. There's no instructions that come up on the screen that tell you how to use it. So it was kind of one of these things where like, what the hell do we do? And it was pre-internet. I'm pretty sure now I could kind of log on somewhere and find out. Or if somebody's hearing this and they did by some chance beat that game, please hit me up at hollow9podcast@gmail.com. That's the word hollow, the number 9, INE, podcast, all one word, at gmail.com. And put Jurassic Park Super Nintendo in the subject line and let me know, how do you beat this game? I would definitely, like, I know I've got a Super Nintendo somewhere in a storage unit, and I would definitely like go on eBay to try to find a copy of the Jurassic Park game just to beat it, just because it's one of those things. It's like Big, you know, it's like where he couldn't beat this video game as a kid, but when he comes back as an adult he beats it. I would feel like it would be completing the circle in that regard. But then there was, for Xbox, Jurassic Park Operation Genesis, which was the first of the SimCity Jurassic Park games. In fact, that game was so short-lived and so few units were produced that I remember when I was working at my corporate job, my manager, who was a kid, well, he wasn't my manager at the time, but he was just a guy I worked with. He was like a year and a half older than me. He found one of these sites, kind of like Declutter, although it was like an earlier version of that, where you could kind of go on and you put in the ISBN code of the game, and it'll tell you how much you can get for it. And Operation Genesis, you could get like, I don't know, a couple $100 for, because it was out of print and like not that many people bought it. And I refused to give it up because it was just such a cool, it reinvigorated my interest in these sort of like, you know, SimCity type game. And Jurassic World Evolution is literally exactly Operation Genesis, just updated for the modern day consoles. It's a long tangent away from the movie I'm supposed to be talking about, because I almost feel like it's like the movie is such a state. It's like Star Wars, you know what I mean? It's like, who doesn't know the iconic scenes? Who doesn't know the scene when the whole idea is this guy who built this park, who has these scientists who discovered the way to bring dinosaurs back by taking blood that would be still within mosquitoes that landed on tree branches that got covered with tree sap that then petrified and became amber and were, you know, buried under the ground just like the dinosaur bones. They said, oh, we could extract the genetic information from that blood and recreate and clone. And it's so funny. So this is where this movie is dated if you watch it now, because all the computer stuff, I mean, it's like huge CRT screens and the graphics are so basic. Like, they show a guy doing genetic manipulation and he's wearing VR gloves and a VR helmet, and we see on the screen what he's seeing, and it's just like a DNA double helix being extended and recompressed, and it's like, you know, polygons like a primary color wheel polygons. Nothing like what we would see in any movie that even slightly dealt in stuff like this today. But there's something charming about it too, and how simple the concept was. Because, you know, after this movie, everybody who had seen the movie, everybody read the book, suddenly we're all geneticists, right? We're like, oh, they could really do this. And maybe that was the point. Maybe that was the social conditioning designed in releasing a movie like this. But anyway, you know, the whole idea is this guy has this Disney World that he wants to build of reborn dinosaurs, and that's basically the point of the Jurassic World Evolution game as well, is you're trying to build your theme park and make it marketable. And like in the game, much like in the movie, there are times where, you know, you've cloned dinosaurs that are too aggressive to be caged, and they break out and they run rampaging through the park, and you have to get your security team to tranquilize them or kill them, depending. It's pretty cool. It's a lot of fun. Fun game. But not so fun for the people like the characters we follow in the movie. So it's not only these two paleontologist and paleobiologist and this mathematician, because he's into something called the chaos theory, which was the buzzword when this movie came out. Ian Malcolm, Jeff Goldblum. In fact, he mounts what I used to use in all of my conspiracy theory rants and ravings on other podcasts, or just in general, like when they would say, oh yeah, we can redo this movie from 20 years ago with much better graphics. And I'm like, you were so concerned about whether or not you could, you never stopped to think about whether or not you should. I call it the Jeff Goldblum Jurassic Park defense, founded in this film. So the whole idea is this guy wants these experts to sign off on the viability of the park, on its safety precautions and all sorts of things that they're really not super qualified to sign off on, especially because they expressed doubts right from the beginning, learning that in addition to the, majestic brachiosaurs, which are the first dinosaurs they see, the first, I will say, for his credit, Spielberg, what he was able to do with the keeping the mystery of the shark for as long as possible with Jaws, as much as we knew what we were getting into, we knew what the movie was going to be about, he did a great job of building the tension and building the mystery before we see the first dinosaurs. And of course, this movie was like the pinnacle of special effects, Industrial Light and Magic and Stan Winston creating not only the computer animations, but the Tyrannosaurus Rex was like a real, like a practical robot in addition to the sections that were computer animated. They had to raise it was like the urban legend. They had to raise the ceiling of the soundstage they were shooting in by, 20 feet or so that they could have a 29-foot tall operating T-Rex to attack the two cars in the epic and famous scene. Ironically, that scene, as landmark as it is, so like the guy who's Mr. Hammond sends these doctors, and he also has his two grandchildren flown to the island because he wants them to see the dinosaurs too. Nothing like putting everybody in harm's way, because they don't realize, and it's always espionage, right? It's always this one fly in the ointment. Dennis Nedry, the computer IT guy, the cyber security IT guy, when we meet him at the beginning of the film, he's meeting with somebody from a competing genetic industrial company, and they're way behind Hammond's company, InGen, and they want viable embryos from the dinosaurs to be able to kind of get light years ahead and possibly overtake InGen and do their own Jurassic Park. And so they hired Dennis Nedry, who's not happy with how little money he's being paid for this massive job. He underbid for the job and is regretting it, and he has debts. And so he has agreed to steal some eggs and smuggle them out of the park in a famous Barbasol with a false bottom that we all thought would be the key to the second movie, because when Dennis Nedry eventually gets killed by one of the dinosaurs in the park, we see the Barbasol can roll out of his pocket and roll down the side of a hill and then get covered in mud, and everyone's like, oh, that's going to be how they make the second movie, not knowing that Michael Crichton apparently had already started writing a second novel. And of course, so while they're out on the tour, the first time they stop in the area where the T-Rex is supposed to be, the T-Rex doesn't show up. They even try baiting it with a live goat from a feeding elevator, comes up and just leaves a goat, but no show. And then they find a Triceratops on the side of the off to the side of the path. They're in these automated Jeeps, very famous green and red Jeeps. And they're on kind of like an automated track. And of course, Alan Grant is able to just open the door and jump out when he sees this kind of commotion on the side. And it turns out there's like a Triceratops on its side. And, he and Ellie Sadler are like fascinated. And they go, and it's like, apparently it's sick. And this was like a scene. She's in these, like, she gets these plastic gloves that go up to her shoulder, and she wants to reach into this giant pile of dinosaur poop to see if it's eating anything that could be making it sick. And then on the way back, there's also a storm approaching the island. They're on an island off the coast of Costa Rica, and the storm is threatening to cut them off from being able to travel back to the mainland. And that was how Nedry was supposed to get his Barbasol can off the island. He was supposed to hand it off to an agent on the boat. And he's got this whole scheme built to give himself a 10-minute window to get from the main office to the dock to hand it off and get back. And during that time, the fences, the electrified fences, are going to go offline. And he didn't think it would be such a big deal because he would be back in time. But of course, he doesn't get back in time. He gets killed. And as the system goes offline, the cars are going back past the Tyrannosaurus Rex area. And of course, the T-Rex attacks. It's almost like they built the whole movie around that. It is the sort of apex that's like the center of the film, and everything's building up to that, and then from that point on, everything is kind of descending into chaos until we have the final standoff, where the T-Rex actually comes to save the day. So it's the T-Rex is like thought of as the first big bad, but you also have the Velociraptors, which are like problem-solving intelligent, and they're the ones that figure out how to open doors. And once the fences are all offline, they all escape and they pack hunt, and they're like really terrorizing the island. Most of the people that we meet throughout the film, including Samuel L. Jackson, a early days, 93, so it's a pre Pulp Fiction Samuel L. Jackson. He's got a few scenes before he's reduced to just a prosthetic arm. Well, not even prosthetic. He's an arm that had been attached to a body, but that's all they find of him. And a pretty cool jump scare. But he also has the memorable "hold on to your butts" line that he says about almost everything in the movie. Who else? B.D. Wong is in there as the main geneticist and overseeing the lab, cloning the dinosaurs. It's fun. It's a blast. It's a real romp. And every movie after that has been basically trying to recreate the lightning in a bottle in this one. So I always say, if there's a series, if you're a fan of the series, you should really be starting with the first one, because there's tons of in-jokes and Easter eggs. I've only seen bits and pieces of Jurassic World, and I was so I had seen all three of the originals in the theater. I saw Lost World, Jurassic Park. I actually read that book. I'm trying to think. It must have been 3 years later. I was in the hospital for pneumonia, and in the week that I was recovering, that was one of the books that I was reading. And then that summer it came out, and I went to see it with a bunch of friends. We were a little disappointed. The ending of the movie was kind of garbage. The book was okay. The movie was not great. And then Jurassic Park 3 was just kind of like why did they do this? And so once that happens, this is also the era where if you had 3 and the second 2 were strikes, there weren't going to be any more. It was just before the era of everything being rebooted, or what my preference, 20 years later sequels, which is exactly what Jurassic World is. But I don't know, there's just something about it that feels a little on the phony side. You've got Chris Pratt in there and Bryce Dallas Howard, and B.D. Wong though is the sort of through line, unfortunately. In any case, yeah, Jurassic Park, dinosaurs, a theme park of dinosaurs. Even now, even after seeing the movie, if they made this for real, I would probably want to go. It would probably cost $1 billion. It would be impossible for us normies to make it there, but who knows? Who knows? There probably is one, is the thing. There probably is one that none of us know about, and for all we know, it's been decommissioned and they just leave the dinosaurs running around on this island in the middle of nowhere. They in the book, I remember it was big. There is a contingency where the dinosaurs cannot create the amino acid lysine on their own, and they require it to be included in the food that they're being fed. And so that way, if anything happens, or if any of them were able to get off the island, they would just die off because they wouldn't be able to survive without this. Although, in the movie they realized, because another contingency was they made all the dinosaurs in the park were females, that they wouldn't be able to reproduce on their own, everything would be controlled. Well, they used frog DNA to fill in the gaps of the DNA that they were recovering from the amber, and the amphibious DNA has the ability to swap sexes in a survival situation. So they were able to, some of the creatures became male, and they were able to start reproducing on their own. This is all a don't play God. This is modern day Frankenstein mixed with Call of the Wild, I guess. Don't try to play God, because you can't. You're just not good at it. and it will always result in disaster. Lots of people die, some people survive. It's very adventurous. There's a lot of funny gag type stuff. It's Spielberg at the height of Spielberg. I would definitely recommend checking it out if by some stroke of weirdness you've never seen any of the original. It'll put a lot of things into perspective. You'll get jokes you've never gotten before, and your life will be fuller for it. And I fully endorse Jurassic Park from 1993. Okay, this has been a long, rambly, tangential episode. I hope you're enjoying it. Again, please like, share, smash the bell icon, subscribe, tell a friend, tell two friends, write into the mailbox. Tell me what movies you think I should do that we haven't done yet. I'm sure there's still so many I have in mind to do, but if there's some stuff that people out there want to hear, the hundreds and hundreds of you who are checking it out, please don't hesitate to write. Until then, I think it's time for us to get back. Coffee break over, and I'll see you next time at the movies.
You've been listening to the Hollow 9 Network, bringing you the very best in fan-made media. That's the word hollow, the number 9, I-N-E. Find the Hollow 9 Network on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. Rate and review us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you find your podcasts. Email us at hollow9podcast@gmail.com. Leave us your feedback. Join in the conversation and be a part of the action. Join in the fun. Hollow 9.